Silicon Valley, the epicenter of America's technology sector, yes, but also insane housing costs, not enough density, way too much driving, and at the same time, car-free streets galore, amazing weather, way more biking than I ever expected, and as of a couple weeks ago, a newly electrified regional rail service with a vastly improved timetable. You guys, I spent 3 days riding Caltrain up and down the San Francisco peninsula, and I have so many thoughts, and it's all coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics always welcome, and a question that often comes up is, you, CityNerd, are based in the Western US, so how is it that you've never once done a video on location in the Bay Area? Well, today I'm rectifying that, and San Francisco itself does not have a starring role in today's video, but it is the northern terminus of the corridor we're going to look at. So let's go ahead and do a very condensed review of a couple points of nerd interest. Salesforce Transit Center, dull, and this region has just way too many different transit agencies. The new central quote-unquote subway. You know, the word subway implies a speedy and efficient service, but the time it takes the Muni T line to actually get from the at-grade segment south of downtown, through the portal and into the below-grade segment that runs north to Chinatown is roughly the same duration as my typical video, and I'm just not going to subject you to all that. Bay Area Rapid Transit. On the plus side, the trains themselves are looking pretty good right now. On the minus side, I rode down to the Mission one night just to hang out, and it took me like 10 minutes to get out of the 16th Street station because they're doing some kind of Fairgate modernization and only had one turnstile open. I can't believe there isn't a better way to do this. That's cool though. I'm sure everybody who rides public transit has all kinds of slack built into their day and they don't need to be at work on time or anything. Also, despite the transit improvements going on and how many people are out walking and biking and scooting, there's still just way too much driving here. The traffic headed toward the Bay Bridge alone in the PM peak is just absolutely nuts. But San Francisco is still just an absolutely gorgeous city. There were way more people out on the street and it was much more vibrant than you'd ever expect if you listen to certain demagogues talk about the city. Here's the plan for today. I've begun to notice how often Silicon Valley cities show up in my videos when I'm talking about like suburbs that have lots of great urban amenities or cities that just aren't building enough housing. The combination of those two issues is fascinating to me and I wanted to really dig into it. So San Francisco's role in today's adventure begins and ends at San Francisco Station, the northern terminus of Caltrain. And one thing that became clear as I walked to and from the station every day was just how many people bike to the station in the morning, bring their bike on the train, and use it for a last mile connection wherever their destination is to the south. Micromobility really has to be such a cheat code for Silicon Valley. When we get down there, you're going to notice it's very flat. The bike infrastructure is often pretty good, and it's just very, very tough to beat the year-round climate you get in the Bay Area. Let's talk about Caltrain itself. The entire line has now been electrified, and the last diesel train was retired from service between San Francisco and San Jose on September 21st of this year, so this is brand new stuff. The new trains are faster with better acceleration and deceleration, and they're much quieter, and as part of the rollout, frequencies are roughly double what they were previously. Now, I've heard there had been some hiccups in service in the opening couple of weeks, partly because of the heat wave and concerns about how the rail and catenary might respond to the mercury hitting triple digits. I did observe these guys doing whatever it is they're doing down in Palo Alto, which I guess makes me feel like the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board is on top of things. But also, when I was on the train and we were late getting out of San Francisco Station on my first ride, I heard over one of the conductor's two-way radios the following phrase, word for word. Can someone help? I can't figure out how to take the parking brake off on this thing. Which is something you'd expect to hear from a 16-year-old the first time you take them out with their learner's permit, but maybe not on regional rail. Let's start heading south. One thing you'll notice on your way out of San Francisco is, once you get out of the downtown core, there's not much height. Sometimes it feels like the tallest structure is an elevated freeway. And I assume a lot of the land near the Caltrain alignment is brownfield that requires a lot of remediation. But you have to wonder, given the housing prices in this part of the country, doesn't just about every possible thing pencil out, remediation or not? Also, not a focus of today's video, but the interchange station between Caltrain and BART at Millbrae, which is the closest Caltrain gets to San Francisco International Airport. Just a massive, hulking, and interesting piece of infrastructure. And there is some dense infill around the station. And we are now in San Mateo County, so let's get to our first city of interest, which is San Mateo. So most of the cities we're going to look at today are places I've looked at in Google Earth before because that's what I do. And they're always cropping up as outliers in the data. But even given that, I was still unprepared for how good the urban fabric really is around these stations. This is B Street in downtown San Mateo, right by the station. And what you're going to see as we go through this video is nearly every one of these cities has pedestrianized the original main street adjacent to the Caltrain station. So for each of these, I'll try to give you a street view comparison to the pre-open street condition, and often it's the most recent street view available. So these are fairly recent developments. One thing I noticed on B Street, the cute indie bookstore is pro Measure T, and I'm very pro indie bookstore, so I really just had to figure out what Measure T was. Looks like it repeals height and density limits on new buildings so the city can, build more housing. So chalk up a common W for indie bookstores who are probably fighting an uphill battle against a lot of established homeowners. Although I have to say, when I was walking through neighborhoods here, there were formal pedestrian cut-throughs on a lot of the residential cul-de-sacs. I've tried to get this kind of stuff done when I was a consultant on bike ped plans and city code updates. It's not that easy, so I'm going to give the city of San Mateo its due. Still in San Mateo, but we're moving south to Hillsdale Station, and this one was totally renovated as part of the electrification project. It's now elevated and all the crossings are grade separated. Vehicles don't cross the tracks here, and you take a stairway up to the center platform. This is really how the station should be, especially since this is the alignment California High-Speed Rail will be using whenever that happens. But one thing you'll notice as you travel up and down the peninsula, there are just a crap ton of at-grade crossings, which are not amazing for safety and operations. Just check the record of the Bright Line down in Florida. But I guess if they manage to remove one of the 41 remaining at-grade crossings every 10 years or so, the whole thing should be done by the time California High-Speed Rail opens. Oh, and by the way, Hillsdale, no car-free historic Main Street, just a shopping mall and the finest gastronomic experience available in San Mateo County. Our next destination, Redwood City, again, not a city I've ever had any reason to visit. So when I got here and saw the gateway treatments that say climate best by government test, first of all, it took me a long time to even parse that phrase, and I had to do research to figure out what it even means. Don't give me homework. Anyway, it turns out the slogan derives from a government climatological report prior to World War I, which declared that Redwood City's location on the peninsula was in a three-way deadlock for the world's most pleasant climate, tied with Africa's Mediterranean coast and the Canary Islands. Well, while Redwood City is coasting on its past glories, the year 2024 just called, and it's triple digits on October 6th, so I eagerly await the next government-administrated climate test. Slogans aside though, Redwood City is legit. Broadway, the city's main street that converges right on the Caltrain station, completely pedestrianized for a few blocks, and a couple of the side streets are too. Probably the coolest historic architecture of any of the cities in the valley, and Redwood City really leans into it in its branding, but also there was probably more new density cropping up downtown than any of the other cities I've visited. So to me, if I'm making a tier list of Silicon Valley Caltrain station areas, this one probably goes in my S tier. Now let's talk about a city I didn't actually visit. I only rode through for reasons that are going to be clear in a second. Atherton, California, just south of Redwood City. Now, there are several cities in between San Francisco and San Jose that have a Zillow home value index of around $2 million, and let's leave alone the fact that homes are actually more affordable in San Francisco itself, a city where you're much more likely to also avoid the expense of a car. The Silicon Valley cities we're looking at are super expensive. Well, in Atherton, California, $2 million is what's known as low-income housing. And here's the kicker. Not only does Atherton, California not build housing, which is pretty clear just riding through on Caltrain, the zoning regulations only permit one single-family home per acre, and the city prohibits the construction of sidewalks. Just think for a minute how insane that is. I did most of my professional work in Oregon, where we have a statewide land use planning framework, and it requires cities to have pedestrian networks in their adopted plans. California, I guess, is cool with cities just declaring themselves exempt from cooperating on basic things like transportation safety and regional housing solutions. Anyway, now you know why I didn't get off the train or try to walk through this area, because it's basically impossible by design. I mean, even the massive, unsightly arterial that runs through all these cities doesn't have sidewalks in Atherton. Google will detour you onto side streets that also don't have sidewalks. So this is State Route 82, better known as El Camino Real, or it's California, so they probably pronounce it real. My Spanish isn't amazing, but my mental translation is camino, from the verb caminar, meaning to walk, and real, royal, so it's the royal walkway. And let's make no mistake, traversing this corridor on foot is an absolutely regal experience. Like, I'm all about street trees, especially when there's a heat wave going on, but did they ever run this design by someone using a mobility device? Because I'm skeptical. So here's the thing, the upgraded Caltrain is cool, but there's still just way too much north-south capacity that's dedicated to personal vehicles. The 101 freeway runs parallel to El Camino Real, not that far away, and Caltrans is trying to charge people extra to use the express lanes. I don't know, it seems like there's more than enough capacity that they're just giving away for free. Okay, let's get back to cities. Menlo Park, birthplace of Google, and I'll come back to Google when we get further south. Charming Caltrain station, and I did notice that there seemed to be a strong correlation between having a charming historic station and not having any grade separation at all, so that's a conundrum. Menlo Park also has a pedestrianized main street leading right to the station, Santa Cruz Avenue, and this one's actually kind of funny because they decided to only go halfway with the idea, literally. I'm sure there's a really important traffic circulation rationale for this. Or actually, knowing how this kind of thing goes, I'm not really sure at all. Next stop moving south, Palo Alto Station. Cute Art Deco stuff going on, and also grade separation, so there goes that theory. If you want to cross from one platform to the other, there are tunnels, and I feel like this is where we need to get to with all these stations. So Palo Alto may be a bit forward thinking, but the city's main street, University Avenue, very charming as they all are, and very busy, probably because we're a few hours before kickoff on Saturday at Stanford Stadium. Not pedestrianized for whatever reason, but a couple of the side streets are. If you remember from last week's video, bike score rating of 91, and I did see lots of biking in Palo Alto and some pretty unique modal filtering. Also, off-street paths with characteristically California signposts, overloaded with rules and regulations, with a view of the old steel truss San Francisco Bridge, which they managed to thread all of Caltrain's new catenary wires through, right next to one of the most famous trees on the West Coast, which I'm assured is as old as this nation's Constitution. I won't spend much time here talking about the college that uses that tree for a mascot, other than to say, when you have a major university in your town, it usually means you have much more political support for biking and other non-driving options, and Palo Alto is certainly no exception. Also, I just want to point out that some of the most walkable, vibrant places that exist in the US are parking lots around college football stadiums on fall weekends. Virginia Tech was in town the Saturday morning I came down to Stanford because Stanford is now apparently in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Anyway, the Virginia Tech fans were making themselves right at home, and honestly, Palo Alto is fine, but I'd be interested in checking out Blacksburg on a fall weekend too. One last stop before we leave Palo Alto, California Street Station in the southern part of the city, which has a cool bike tunnel that runs underneath. Also, you'll never believe it, California Avenue, completely pedestrianized, so it turns out Palo Alto didn't miss the boat on this after all. Tons of people out on bikes. I'm telling you, this has to be an amazing area of the country to get out on two wheels. You're probably good to go every month of the year. For that matter, mini golf, also probably a solid year-round open street activity. Okay, this video could be much longer than it already is because I didn't even get to San Jose or Santa Clara. But still to come, a couple of cities that really helped crystallize the extreme nature of the California housing crisis. And also more cool train footage because That's what this channel is all about. Usual reminder of all the things you can click on to goose this channel's performance, especially the bell, and all the ways you can connect if you want a sneak peek at the different places I'm going when I'm out on location. Patreon funded trip to Atlanta and non-Patreon funded trip to Tucson, Arizona coming soon. So here's the thing about Silicon Valley. It's probably the most conspicuous example of a pretty particularly American dynamic. And it's the idea that if you're a highly competent, highly motivated human from just about any other part of the world, you can come to this country and rise to a completely different level socioeconomically than you can pretty much anywhere else. Which brings me to our next destination, the Googleplex in Mountain View, California. I think I made the point in a recent video that I don't have a boss these days, and what an amazing improvement to my quality of life that is. But in reality, this is the company that sends me a check every month for all the terrible ads they interrupt my videos with. So one striking thing about the campus itself is how shockingly multimodal it is. There's protected bike infrastructure everywhere. The campus has its own bike share system, which is important because the property is so huge and spread out. You can even get miniature G-bike replicas in the company's store. They clearly invest a lot in transit. There's actually a whole other video I want to do on how somewhat enlightened corporations with large campuses do transportation demand management, or TDM, and try to reduce drive-alone trips both to and within their properties. It's a fascinating topic, so if any of you all work at Google or something and can get me inside the security perimeter so I can make a video about all this, make sure to invite me when Google employees are out waterfowl hunting though, because I absolutely must film that. Non-negotiable. The other thing about the Googleplex is the existence of places like this is, I think, inseparable from the region's housing affordability crisis. We're talking about thousands of jobs right here that compensate people extremely well. You might even say disproportionately well. I mean, there's just an absolute yawning chasm between the salary of someone who works here and, say, the take-home pay of whoever runs this taco truck a few blocks off campus. Although, maybe they're doing pretty good business. But everywhere you go on the peninsula, there's evidence of massive tech sector affluence, right next to people who I have no idea how they managed to cobble together an existence. Like, every time I stop to have lunch or grab a beverage, I want to ask the person who is serving me, how do you do this? How do you make it work? So my recommendation, someone with actual journalism chops should ask these questions and write a book. We kind of casually accept that this is the way Silicon Valley is now. But back in Menlo Park, there's a reminder that the 60s counterculture movement wasn't just in San Francisco and Berkeley. These villages along the Caltrain corridor were important in the psychedelic movement as well. And I guess psychedelic is a word you could use for some of the artwork you'll find on the grounds of the Googleplex. But it's also interesting to think about how we got from acid test freakouts to people building computers in garages to Silicon Valley being kind of like the dominant force in our whole nation's economy. So Mountain View, did I mention bike score of 92? There are two excellent trails connecting the Googleplex and the other tech campuses in the eastern part of the city to downtown. The Permanente Creek Trail to the north, which goes over the 101 freeway, and the Stevens Creek Trail to the south, which bisects the Googleplex and goes under the 101 freeway, but also has amazing, expensive structures that elevate over some of the arterials. I didn't do enough homework to figure out how these were funded. I think you have to be a rich city to do stuff like this, but at least this is what they're spending money on. Mountain View Station / wine bar, very charming, and this is also the northern terminus of VTA Light Rail. If you're coming down from San Francisco on a 2-hour transit journey to see the San Francisco 49ers play in a completely different metro area, sorry, I'm just never gonna get over that. And you will be less than amazed to know that downtown Mountain View's main street that leads right to the Caltrain station, Castro Street, also completely pedestrianized. While we take a little stroll here, understand that Caltrain runs on what used to be the San Francisco and San Jose Railroad, which was built as a commuter line in the 1860s. So if you've been puzzled as to why nearly every one of these station communities has an old main street that dates from the decades before we ruined everything with autocentric planning, well, now you know. It's funny, when I did my video on the NIMBYest cities and was comparing BART station areas on the east side of the bay to Caltrain stations on the west side, I noted that the difference in urban form was kind of staggering. So going on this journey down the peninsula was really an education for me. It all makes sense now. Still, it's kind of a credit to most of these cities that they've not only preserved these pre-automobile main streets, but completely pedestrianized them. And I think Mountain View is one of the better examples. They really do seem to care about making the city more livable, although I'm not sure how Vision Zero is going, given a lot of the infrastructure that's still out here. Also, there's not nearly enough housing construction going on, but at least Mountain View is building stuff. This is literally the southern city limits, the last property before you cross over into the next city. So maybe I'd put Mountain View on the A line of my tier list. So we crossed the street going south, and now we're in Sunnyvale, which did top my NIMBYest cities in America list, and I don't apologize for that, but let's take a closer look. First of all, I love a residential street with modest ranch-style homes and humble fuel-efficient cars in the driveway. And surely these are not the $2 million homes Zillow is talking about. Yeah. Downtown Sunnyvale, though, there is some new density going in, and maybe some of this wasn't reflected in the most recent data I looked at. So I'll go ahead and put Sunnyvale a couple rows above Atherton on my Silicon Valley tier list. And does Sunnyvale have a completely pedestrianized street leading straight to the Caltrain station? I'm telling you, every one of these cities wants in on the action, and historic Murphy Street is no exception. It's ironic. The original rail line from the 1860s laid the foundation for all kinds of great urban fabric that enables less car dependency. And the upgraded Caltrain finally starts to build on the promise of all that great latent urbanism. But when you travel north out of San Mateo, you roll by an unbroken procession of auto repair shops, almost hidden out of sight from drivers but readily apparent to train commuters. It just reminds you what a huge scam so much of suburban living is, with all kinds of hidden costs and liabilities. I mean, you can spend $2 million or like $8 million to live in Silicon Valley, and you probably have to own and maintain at least one car. Or you can spend the bargain basement price of like $1.25 million and have a good shot at living car-free in San Francisco and just chilling on the train on your way to your awesome job down in Santa Clara County, engineering the demise of humanity or whatever it is you all do down there. I mean, San Francisco may not have the best climate by any government test, but it is extremely good, and the quality of life is kind of off the charts. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support, which did really help cover some of the costs of travel down to the Bay Area. By the way, I am not AI, despite this patron's handle that says otherwise. Trust me, an AI version of this channel would be much higher quality than whatever it is you just watched. Honestly though, there are an increasing number of AI channels out there, and I appreciate that so many of you come back here on a regular basis to listen to me talk about whatever I decide was important to talk about from week to week. So big thanks for watching and supporting. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.